Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi everyone. Io sono Luca,
I'm
italiano
Luca. I'm Italian. I live in Brussels. Welcome. And thank you for taking part in this cultural moment. Hello, good evening to everyone. I'm Cécile Meri. I'm French. And I'm also in Brussels. And we're really happy to have Catherine and Andreas with us as well. So we'll hand over to them as well so that they can say hello. Thank you, Cécile Marie and Luca. We're really happy to be together this evening. Andreas is also linked up. It's lovely to see you all. There's lots of interest in this theme. It's very strong. And the development of the first times, as God guided everything, then such different, strong characters of people, so different. It's this mosaic that's so important. So we're very happy that you're wanting to take part. And there's some people here from other zones too, from Italy or from Dalle. So thank you for this evening. Great. And we're really happy to be in the same sitting room this evening around Michel and our two Indigo people from the zone, Cécile Marie and Luca, so they can drive the car. We're in good hands. And it seems that this journey, this evening, can be part of the journey that the whole opera is undertaking. So it's so profoundly linked to the statutes, but you need to put the statutes into the historical context. And this is a really good way to go into those first times and understand a bit more how it was, what it was like. It has to be very great to understand. We've got lots of volunteers linked up, Focolare of Lyon, different places. People linked up from Malta, Belfast. I can see different faces that I know very well and some that I don't know so well. That's fantastic that those that are doing the translation into these languages, I think maybe there's 6 or 7 translations. We're speaking a language that isn't really part of Western Europe, but we'll go quite slowly so that we can all understand. So I'm going to hand over to you, Luca and Cécile Marie. Thank you, Catherine and Andreas. So the aim of this evening, so we want to tell you a bit what the program will be. We'll start with Michel, who will talk to us. And then at 9 o'clock, there'll be a session on questions and answers. You can ask questions of Michel through the chat under the name questions, domanda. That's very important. You need to send your questions to domanda, and you can do it during the talk of Michel, so in such a way that we can see them, we can collect them, and then we'll read them in order to Michel. We'll have a bit of a questions and answer session. We'll try to moderate it a little bit. But now we have to hand over to Michel. And we'll try to journey briefly through to get to know him a bit better. We'll try and say a little bit about his life. He was born in Maastricht 66 years ago. He studied law, and then he went to Loppiano, and he was in Loppiano Monte. Went back to the Netherlands, and he was in university, and he's worked as a journalist. 10 years ago, he did a master's in Sofia in the field of Trinitarian ontology with Piero Corda, who was his supervisor. Went back to Holland and started to work in a university, Thomas More, which trying to answer their ethical and philosophical questions. And then 2015, he started to work for his PhD in Holland. And this PhD is on the life and thought and writings of Chiara. His supervisor has been Piero Corda, but also a Dutch theologian. He defended his thesis, and the title was Only the Gospel, and that was August last year. And it's had great success. Many people were present, some very important professors. From about 300 people were present, and that made it such a success. So we really thank Michel. And as the English say, the floor is yours. So the microphone is all yours.
So thank you, Luca and Cecile Marie. I'm really delighted that I can be here with you and share something about this fantastic adventure that I've been able to follow over these many years, along with other works I've been doing. And as Luca was saying, you're invited to read this book, which about Chiara, entitled Only the Gospel. So I'm going to share not so much about the book, but a specific period of Chiara's life, which were those years in the 50s. So first of all, just a couple of words about that came about. As Luca said, 10 years ago, I finished my studies at Sofia, Lopiano. I had done on the Trinitarian life in Augustine and Chiara. And then coming back to Holland, the professor at Tilburg University said to me, you have to do a thesis on Chiara because the academic world needs to get to know her, and I'll be your supervisor. And so Piero Corda also was very interested and happy in doing this work. So I had a great team around me to go ahead with this work. When I began to write the first chapter about how the movement began, I realized that often we repeat the story of the ideal in a kind of a critical way, taking it according to sharing it the way that we had heard about it. But I felt the need that it wasn't the case to always share the story in that same way, to hand it down even chronologically. I remember certain facts, episodes might not have happened exactly as they had been told. I realized that many moments were years after the war. Some of this awareness felt if I really had to do a good scientific study, I had to be able to substantiate everything. Just to give you a nice little example, we often hear about the date of the 7th of December, when she went to consecrate her life to God. Chiara shares that she went into that little church, there was the storm raging. We know the story that she often has shared. But how do we know it was 7th of December? So I went to check and double check. And it's difficult to know what sources to go to. So really just Chiara and Father Casimir, I went to check on the internet, and you can find the meteorological, you can get info about weather, and I found that early that morning there was a storm, which calmed down later, as we find in Chiara's memories. It was really the case. So just to give you one example, but there are lots of those kind of experiences. So trying to understand all of right to the final point and how the spirituality evolved, I found myself looking at the most varied different sources. One discovers how everything is linked. Give you another example. Hungary, for example, that revolution because of the Russian occupation in October 1956. We know that there was the beginning of the volunteers, but it was really new for me to discover that that event was also, it was the origin of the first day meetings of the movement, which took place in December, give witness to a living Christian community bringing a bigger ideal than communism. Origin of the points of the spirituality, because Chiara felt called to give different themes. So everything is linked. Worked on this book, which is subdivided into three parts: Chiara's life, from her birth to her death, another part that goes chronologically through all of her writings, and there's a third part that's more spiritual. The drawing out year after year the development of her spirituality. I can't go through it all. But we're going to stop on a very interesting period, a painful, difficult period, 50s, between 50 to, say, when the church began to study the movement. It's a particular period because there's that long study for the approval of the movement, and it finishes only in 1965, when Chiara was finally able to sign the first letter as president of the Work of Mary. It's a little known story and a little not shared a lot. Goes somber, dark, to after many years, the dawn of the approval of the movement. So we have this title, From the Darkest Night to the Dawn of the Approval. Poetic phrase from Dante, but then we left in order to see the stars again. The facts of the 1950s have come out in recent years, partially described in different books. For example, the one of Lucia Abbiglienti, Michel Zanzucchi, Gentilini. So it's something which enables us to look at the whole history of the Focolare in such a way that we get a panoramic view. So we jump over the first years of the war, the Piazza Cappuccini, Unity. How did people react? We wanted to understand what about the church, Rome, and even some of Chiara's first companions. And we see how there was a lot of criticism and suspicion already in 1945. There were some judgments. There was Father Casimir, who led the Third Order, which was entrusted to Chiara, 55, to the office of the bishop. Carlo had received some messages from the clergy that there was a group of girls that were sharing some strange things, speaking about unity, love. They called their little house, the house of love, and so on. However, the bishop didn't think there was anything serious there. But criticisms grew. In 1948, announcement of two of these women was made for the girls who lived in Piazza Cappuccino. Even if at that time we didn't speak about Focolare, but Doni, Natalia were living there together. However, keep going ahead, because it was too demanding, authoritarian, the leadership. There was a lack of transparency regarding money, the goods that were being put in common. It was the parents, the attitude towards parents, this very cut with parents, and so some of the people couldn't manage with this way of doing things of Chiara. They wrote to Chiara saying that Chiara's ideas were getting stranger and stranger, that everything for Chiara was a miracle. And all of them were kind of kneeling around to listen to what Jesus had said to her, whereas she was unaware of the time or what was going on outside, the weather, and often she would be changing the program, often at the last moment. I don't know for anyone who knows the Focolare movement knows that sometimes we have a bit like this, we have this habit of changing things at the last minute and not being aware of the time and so on. What emerges here, you can see there's a certain frustration of someone, increasingly irritated by Chiara's way of doing things, which one can understand. Also understand here clearly what's emerging, almost exploding, is a charism, something great weight, and either one throws yourself into it or away from it. So in these accusations, others and some priests joined in. Here also, the bishop who investigated this didn't see any motive for interfering. He saw something charismatic. Criticism continued entrenched in such a way that practically the work of the Focolarini was blocked. Chiara, with her universal vision, moved to Rome at the end of 1948. And we know that Chiara made an impression in Rome in a very short period of time, thanks to Foco, with people of great stature, politicians, prelates, theologians, priests, religious, lay people. And there were the other Focolarine who began to travel, move around. Graziella was there with all her freedom, would roam all over Lazio, Tuscany and beyond. Chiara and the first Focolarini had all that freedom to go around the cities, throughout Italy. They spoke to everyone, lay people, priests, others, about their experience of the gospel. Let's be aware, this is the 1940s Italian church, 20 years before the council. It was, at that time, it was inconceivable that lay people would be speaking to priests about religious matters, and they were women, children, young, speaking about their spiritual experience. So the church in Rome became alarmed, and some people even from Trent wrote their criticisms to the Holy Office, to the Holy See, center in the Vatican that is a kind of, at one time it was called something like a place where there's an inquisition, but a like careful study of movements. So on the 1st of November 1950, Chiara finds an envelope from the Holy Office They're waiting to ask her some questions or a kind of interrogation. Don't know much about that time, but we know from Graziella di Luca, who writes the 5th of January 1951 to the Bishop of Trent to share what the Focolarini in Rome are feeling. She writes, "For the last fortnight, we often have seen Chiara leave the house. She leaves for many hours, returns exhausted, without being able to tell us where she has been and what she's been doing. And we assume that she's been Holy Office. Her great exhaustion makes us think that she's being interrogated delicate subjects. Suffering must have increased by her inability to speak. She who always told us everything that she could." That's Graziella. Surely she didn't know that that same day Chiara had written to the Archbishop, formal contact of the movement at that time. Chiara writes, "It's true, cross is heavy. Days I understood how Jesus collapsed under the weight of the cross. However, Your Eminence, I'm really happy, and from Jesus I've received the grace ready for any decision that the Church gives us. Your Eminence, to be able to give to God all that He, in that spiritual dimension, has done through me. And I assure you that whatever happens, you will always know me to be faithful to my Jesus forsaken and obedient to the Church." The accusation focused on the issue of the centrality of Chiara's person, her leadership style. They accuse her of a sweet tyranny. Other accusations included they place little value on spiritual leadership, think too easily of the painstaking ascent to holiness, don't care about the relationship between young men and women, as if original sin didn't exist. These were the kind of accusations that Chiara given, and many people were complaining that they were taking best people away from Catholic action. Something very serious too was when the papers of Paradise, the Holy Office, the papers about Paradise, and Chiara was accused of mysticism and heresy. Chiara suffered much. In the June of 1951, she wrote to Egino Giordani, "You will find, Foco, that I'm no longer writing as I did before. I'm closed in and reticent. I assure you, I'm frightened, almost terrified about writing. And this is because I've suffered so much under this last interrogation as it's been during the whole of this year." The prelates of the Holy See came to a very tough, very difficult conclusion. They were convinced that the movement had to be taken from the Bishop of Chiara, and the Bishop of Trent received this conclusion that the movement could not be in the hands of Lubich any longer, and that no new Focolari should be opened. This was in 1952. Chiara's reaction was immediate. The next day, she announced she was giving up the leadership of the movement and would continue as a simple Focolarina. Bishop of Trent helped to put things into proportion, said, "The Focolarini won't even notice. It's only something, it's an administrative thing." He knows that Chiara will always be the inspiration. But you can understand that for Chiara, it's a dramatic period, and she lives this period of the dark
C'era però una figura di spicco nella Chiesa che
while
sembrava
there was
capire il nuovo del carisma,
someone
Montini,
in the
il
church
futuro Papa Paolo VI, che allora era stretto collaboratore
at
del
that time
Papa
was a
Pio
close
XII.
collaborator of Pius the
Montini, un
XII, the
parente
Pope
di
of the
Eli
time,
Folonari, incoraggiava
related to Eli Folonari,
prima Eli e poi anche Chiara personalmente,
encouraging Chiara, and
dicendo
then
non avete
Chiara
paura, la Chiesa
personally
esamina,
saying,
ma è
don't
sempre
be afraid
aperta
of the
a nuove
church
forme.
examines things, but is always open to
È
new
lui che poi
forms.
faceva possibile un'udienza dei focolarini con Pio
The
XII.
Focolarine with
Il
Pius
Papa, molto
XII,
preoccupato del pericolo
who
del comunismo,
very
che stava
concerned about
avanzando
the
molto in
danger of
Italia,
communism, which was
spronava
going
i
ahead,
focolarini ad
spreading in
impegnarsi nelle
Italy,
regioni
encouraged the
rosse
Focolari to get
e
involved
comunisti,
in the most communist
Emilia-Romagna e
areas,
Toscana,
the red areas,
un desiderio
Toscana,
presentato almeno
Emilia-Romagna,
come ordine, anche
something
per
that Chiara
avere il
took on board
riconoscimento per il suo
as an
movimento.
order, also to help with the
Ma
recognition of her movement.
nuove ombre si presentavano.
Then
Nel
new
1953 venne
shadows
nominato
appeared.
Alfredo Ottaviani come vice del Santo
53,
Uffizio.
Ottaviano was
Un
appointed
sacro
as the
uomo che
deputy
però sentiva
of
il
the Holy
dovere
See,
di difendere
holy
a
man,
tutti i
who
costi
felt
la Chiesa
the
tradizionale.
duty to
Sempre
defend the
io,
traditional church.
era il suo motto. Niente innovazioni.
No novelties,
Poco
nothing
dopo,
new was his
nel
motto.
54,
Innovation.
Montini viene mandato via da
1954,
Roma,
when
diventa
Tini was sent
arcivescovo
away
di
from
Milano,
Rome, he became the
promosso per
Archbishop
essere
of
vescovo.
Milan, promoted and
Erano gli
moved.
anni in cui il Vaticano era
The Holy
preoccupato per i
Office at
problemi del
this time,
comunismo, della nouvelle théologie,
there was a
del
lot of
fenomeno dei
concern about
riti
the problem
operai
of
in Francia,
communism,
il sacerdote
new
Giovanni
theologies,
Faltini in Italia,
phenomenon of
l'opera
priest
in
workers in
Amalfi,
France,
per il
the
padre
work of a
Kentenich in
priest Zeno
Germania con il suo
Saltini and his
movimento
work in
Schoenstatt.
Adelphia, also Father Kentenich in
Secondo Ottaviani, il Santo Uffizio
Schoenstatt
decide
movement.
di aprire
So
una nuova
with
inchiesta anche al movimento dei
Ottavian,
Focolari
also with Ottaviano decided
e
that they would
seguono
open up a
mesi
new
e mesi
study
di
of the
silenzio, volevano
Focolari. And so
sapere,
months and
ma la
months of
Chiesa
silence
ci
followed.
ha
And I
abbandonato.
was asking herself, but has the church
Nel
abandoned us?
frattempo i Focolarini riescono bene a convincere tanti
Clarini
comunisti italiani a ritrovare
worked
la fede.
well, convincing
Ma non
many
solo, Chiara era venuta in contatto con un vescovo clandestino della Cecoslovacchia, padre
involved
Andrea,
in
e
Eastern
questo padre
Europe.
convince Chiara a lavorare ad un'operazione segreta nell'est dell'Europa.
Encouraged Chiara to be
Forse
involved
alcuni di voi
in a
si ricordano le
project.
avventure di Cengia, un
Some of you might
focolarino
remember the
che
adventures of Chenja,
clandestinamente va
a Focolarino who went
Cecoslovacchia
clandestinely to
nel
Czechoslovakia
1955,
in
dove però verrà
1955,
arrestato dalla polizia e per un
was
paio di
arrested by the police
mesi
for a
scompare.
few months and disappeared.
La situazione della Chiesa nell'est europeo si fa
Church in
ancora più
Eastern Europe
drammatica nel
becomes even more
56,
dramatic
la rivolta
in
in Ungheria,
1956
repressa
with the
duramente dai
uprising in
sovietici.
Hungary, harshly repressed by
Questo ha
the
spinto
Soviets.
Chiara a far studiare alcuni dei primi focolarini la lingua
Some of the
russa.
first Focolarini
Marco,
were
Teodor,
encouraged to
Giulio,
study
Antonio si mettono a
Russian.
studiare russo in una villa in Lazio per
Antonio
alcuni
went to a
mesi,
villa in Lazio
in
to
vista di
study
un
Russian for a few
eventuale
months,
lavoro proprio a
1956, under the
Russia.
encouragement of Chiara.
Il Santo Ufficio è contento di
The
questo impegno
office
dei
is
Focolarini
pleased
contro il
about this
comunismo,
commitment of the
ma
Focolari
ciò
against
nonostante
communism.
non c'è fine
In spite of all
all'indagine da
this,
parte del Santo Ufficio.
the
Il
investigation by
motivo
the Holy
diventa
Office
presto chiaro:
continues.
la crescita impetuosa del
Becomes
movimento in
clear
Italia.
the impetuous growth of
Questa
the
aveva
movement
creato
in Italy,
preoccupazione in
which had
molte
created
diocesi. Chi sono
concerns in
questi
many
focolarini?
dioceses.
Che idee
Who
stanno
are these
diffondendo?
Focolari? What kind of
Sono
ideas are
laici e parlano
the
del
lay
Vangelo.
people
Sono
talking about
donne che
God?
parlano ai
Women
sacerdoti
speaking to
religiosi.
priests
Poi si
and
mischiano
religious.
uomini e donne
The
e
mixture
tolgono
of
dei
men
posti
and
alla
women,
vocazione cattolica.
and they're taking away
Così, quando nel 56 viene
the
nominato
best
un nuovo
people.
vescovo a
Many
Perugia,
recruits
al momento del suo
faction.
insediamento,
So the
dichiara
situation,
di essere venuto per combattere tre
in fact,
pericoli:
the
i comunisti,
threat,
i protestanti e i
the
focolarini.
communists, the
La
Focolari,
situazione si fa grave. C'è
Protestantism,
la
there were
minaccia
these
seria che
concerns
il
were growing.
movimento sarà sciolto.
Three dangers. So that was a sentence a bishop said he's got three dangers to overcome: communist Protestants and the Focolare. So there was a right about this time, another good orator, Father Riccardo Lombardi, got to know Chiara, who was calling the church to a renewal of the world and the church. And so he was behind the ecclesial movement for the better world movement. It was a movement recognized by the church. So he was asking Chiara, thinking maybe there's a way forward that we can do, that we in a unity, in a tight collaboration. Chiara saw this could be a freedom and give the possibility of the movement to be freed. Investigation by the Holy See. And Lombardi saw, in working together with the Focolare, like great allies. Lombardi writes in his diary, they're really great, they're good, but there's a danger they might be a bit closed in their own group, a bit closed within themselves. In July of 1956, Ottaviano asked Lombardi to go to them in the Dolomites to find out exactly what do these Focolare do. Lombardi was overwhelmed, really touched, very impressed by the Mariapolis, and wanted to convince Ottaviano of the orthodoxy of the Focolare. Wrote, yeah, there certainly might be a few aspects that need to be revised, some of the faults of the self-taught, but I believe this can easily be put right. Lombardi writes, Chiara and this Jesuit father meet often and foresee a fusion. But what would it cost? And what would Chiara's place be in this? As long as she could save her movement, Chiara declares herself ready, herself out of the situation, to go to Russia. Her diary, Chiara, on the 14th of August 1956, writes, who knows, the Lord, precisely because of readiness to disappear, doesn't make them the main promoters of the spirit of unity throughout the church. Later, he writes, during the night I seem to have understood many things. Is it not God's will to rethink the whole better world movement with the new divine contribution of the Focolare? The collaborators would be precisely Focolarine, who would form the basis for the recruitment and training of countless future workers. Great thing could emerge. They're being asked for new vocations. Perhaps they are precisely for us, for this common work that God will do with these two pieces. Oh, dream of Lombardi's, but many objective. Foco, Trent, the general of the Jesuits, the priest who was responsible for looking after the movement, like vigiling it, Martigiani, he said such mergers can take the life away from something. Haven't succeeded historically, nor does God perform such miracles as to generate a head in one place and a body in another and then unite them. All these reservations made Chiara back down. At one point she writes to the Focolare, on us, on our movement, there's a shadow being cast, and you know what it is. It's the Holy See. We could have taken it off our show. Would have been enough to join the Better World movement immediately, and we would suddenly have entered into an approved movement, which is placed like a light on a lampstand, and which the Holy Father himself has visited. But what would be the price? Perhaps this light would have died out. The ideal would have disappeared. We would have become something beautiful, but like the others. Chiara
nella
agonized.
Mariapoli del 56, dove
In the
c'erano già
Mariapolis
4
of
vocazioni,
56, where there were
aveva
many
confidato in un
vocations,
focolarino:
she confided to a
ogni volta che mi
focolarino,
si dice che qualcuno vuole entrare in
told that
focolare,
someone
sento come
wants
una
to enter the
pugnalata al
focolare,
cuore.
I feel like a
Quale
stab in my
futuro avranno
heart.
questi?
What future will they have?
Ottaviani continua a mettere in
Ottaviani
discussione
continues to
l'ortodossia del
question
movimento
the
e
orthodoxy of the
rimane
movement,
preoccupato per la
remains
troppo stretta
worried, concerned
collaborazione tra uomini e
about the
donne.
collaboration which is so close
Prepara
between the
la
men and the
decisione di
women.
scioglimento del
The
focolare.
Holy Office
Siamo
prepares
agli inizi del 57.
documents decision to
In
dissolve the
febbraio,
late
Chiaretto, cioè Don
1957.
Foresi,
At the beginning
viene
of
informato
February
che deve lasciare
57,
la diocesi di
John
Roma.
Foresi was told he had to
Va
leave the
a Trento
Diocese
nella
of Rome.
diocesi del vescovo
He
Carlo
had
de
to
Ferrari,
go
chi l'aveva
to Trent, to
ordinato
the
sacerdote
Diocese
3
of
anni prima.
Carlo Ferrari, who had ordained him
Vi leggo
priest 3 years
dalla lettera
previously.
di Don Foresi a Chiara,
John
che
Foresi's
scrive
letter
nel
to
treno
Chiara
quando torna a Trento,
goes
quando va a
like this.
Trento.
He's on the train
Non
to
ti
Trent.
nascondo, Chiara,
I'm
che la
not
croce c'è
hiding from
e la
you,
sento.
Chiara, that the cross
Forse
is
mai mi era
here and I
accaduto
feel
come
it.
ora di
Perhaps
vivere
never
sul
as
vuoto.
before has it happened to me,
Non so
be living
quando
on
arriverò a
such
Trento cosa mi
emptiness.
attenderà, il
But no,
focolare,
when I get to
una
Trent, what will be
parrocchietta
awaiting
alpina,
me? The
un
Focolare,
sobborgo comunista.
a little
Per
alpine
me è lo
parish,
stesso.
communist
Insieme
suburb.
con la
For
croce,
me, it will be
sempre
the
più
same.
mi si
Together with the
manifesta
cross,
all'anima che Gesù
more and more,
vuole
what's
fare una grande
manifest to my
rivoluzione
soul
con questi
is that
ideali
Jesus wants
e
to
che
make a great
niente lo potrà
revolution
fermare.
with this ideal,
La
and that
scoperta che
nothing
il
will be able
Signore
to
ti ha
stop
fatto
him.
fare, Gesù
Government
abbandonato, Gesù in mezzo,
given to
è
you of
troppo
Jesus
grande perché una
forsaken
modesta decisione possa
it,
intaccarla.
for a simple decision
Così
to
Chiaretto.
affect it, to stop it.
Non rimarrà esiliato a lungo
He
a
doesn't
Trento.
remain
Lombardi
exiled there for
lo
long.
invita ad abitare al centro del suo
Lombardi invites
movimento
him to
Mondo
go
Migliore
to the
a
center of
Rocca
his
di Papa.
movement, the better
Era
world,
un'altra
Rocca di
diocesi di
Papa.
Roma.
It's like
Quindi
another
appunto
diocese of
non
Rome.
è che Chiaretto
So
disobbedisce.
it's not that Chiara,
Lombardi era contento di avere Chiaretto
it's a
vicino,
different
vede
diocese.
nuove speranze per una
Lombardi is
fusione,
happy to have
che per
Chiaretto
Chiara
nearby
sembra
and still
inevitabile.
hopes for a merger.
A fine 57,
At the
Chiara
end of
scrive ai suoi focolarini che Lombardi
1957,
sarà
Chiara wrote to
presto
the
il loro nuovo
Focolarini that
superiore
Lombardi would
e
soon
la
be their
sua
new
posizione
leader. His position,
rimane
meanwhile,
estremamente incerta.
remained extremely uncertain.
Intanto però era nata anche la resistenza da
Meanwhile,
parte dello staff di
some
Lombardi, col proprio
resistance from
collega.
Lombardi's own
Gli dicono che
staff
la fusione coi
comes about.
focolarini è assurdo,
They told him the
assurdo,
merger with the
e lo
Focolarini is something
incolpano che si
absurd.
è fatto ingannare
The
dai
Focolarini
focolarini.
have deceived you.
Alla fine è il superiore
In the
generale dei
end, it was the
Gesuiti,
superior
d'accordo con il
general of the
Papa, a
Jesuits,
fermare la
in
fusione.
agreement with the Pope, who stopped
Lascia
Lombardy.
perdere i focolarini e dedicati
Forget the
al mondo migliore.
Focolarini and dedicate yourself to the Better
Chiaro
World
detto.
movement, is what he was
Ma con
told.
ciò, ancora una volta, una
So,
proposta di
but once
fusione si
again,
incaglia e
a
ancora
merger
una volta
proposal
il futuro dei
ran
focolarini è
aground, and
estremamente
the future of the
incerto.
Focolarini is extremely
Il numero uno
uncertain.
del Sant'Ufficio, Cardinale Pizzardo,
The
cioè
number
a
one of the
differenza del
Holy
nostro
Office, the Secretary
segretario
Cardinal
Ottaviani,
Pizzardo,
non
unlike
nutriva
Ottaviani,
riserve
had no
sull'ortodossia dei
reservations
focolarini,
about the orthodoxy
consiglia
of the
al responsabile del
Focolarini,
movimento di
advised
migrare
the leaders
verso
of the
paesi
movement
in cui i vescovi locali
to
non
migrate to
erano ostili.
countries, go to countries where the
Vengono
local
andati in
bishops were
Brasile,
not
dove
hostile.
dilagano le sette protestanti
Why
e
don't you
comunisti.
go to Brazil, where
Prima
Protestant sects and
55,
communists are rampant?
quell'anno
This is before the
57
council.
si rivelò che per Chiara un anno
1957,
drammatico.
it turned
Viene a
out to
sapere che
be
il
a
Santo Ufficio
dramatic year for
proporrà al
Chiara.
Papa lo scioglimento
Got
del
to know
movimento e
that
poi a maggio subisce un
dissolution,
rivestimento
a decree for the
episcopale a
dissolution of the
Roma
Focolari had come
che la
from the Holy
costrinse a
Office.
lunghi
And she'd
mesi
also
di
had a
inattività.
serious car accident in Rome,
Che
which
speranza
forced her
aveva?
into long, many
L'unico era la
months
presenza di persone di
inactivity.
fiducia
So
intorno a Pio XII. C'era la sorella del
Chiara
Papa,
drew hope
Monsignora
from the
Bacelli,
presence of some people
che
who were
quel mese
around
era venuta
Pius
in
XII,
Mariapoli e che
his
aveva messo
sister
a disposizione di Chiara
Ellie,
la
who
sua
put her
villa a
villa in Grotta
La
Ferrata
villa
at
Maria
Chiara's
Assunta.
disposal, the Villa
C'era
Maria
anche la
Assunta.
governante papale, la suora
Also, the
tedesca
papal
Pasqualina
governess,
Lehnert,
the German
anche lei
sister
amica del
Pasqualina
movimento.
Leonard, She also was a friend of the movement. So the doctor attending the sick Pope had been a former focolarino. On 3 occasions, Pius XII found on the decree for the disillusionment of the movement, on 3 occasions, the Pope refused to sign the decree. What do they have against these good focolarini? He allegedly said to Sister Pasqualina. At the third refusal, the Pope withdrew the file from the jurisdiction of the Holy Office. And so, New Hope, the Pope not only doesn't condemn the movement, but has a good, with the protection of the Pope, the pathway for recognition from the Church seems to open up. Once again, fate strikes. The 9th of October, 1958, Pius XII died. Just after a month of the death of the Pope, installation of the new Pope, John the 23rd, a letter from Ottaviano goes out to the bishops. The most eminent fathers of the Holy Office have come to the conclusion that the above-mentioned Focolare movement should not be supported by the bishops because the principles by which the movement is inspired and the practice it follows cannot be approved. Don Foresi is in a letter to the Bishop of Trent, is not afraid to call Ottaviano's move just so quickly after the death of the Pope, describes it as an attempt to suffocate the movement. But he doesn't lose faith. Everything certainly can only end well. At certain moments, it seems that the clouds thicken, everything fades. So many years, every moment of suspension and pain is nothing but the prelude to a new expansion, a new deepening of the life of God in souls. While from various dioceses a stream of negative reports continue to come, especially from priesthood-led, and a few Focolarini were quite against the actions of the Catholic action. Chiara writes, I've heard criticism from our people against Catholic action. It's something that makes my heart bleed. We must, the love that never judges, and it's not enough not to judge, we must love and support. September 1959, Foresi embarked on a tour throughout Italy to visit the bishops, a charm offensive, you could say. Just at that time, our so-called hardliner Ottaviano, he becomes the head of the Holy See. In October 1959, at the meeting of the bishops, of the Italian bishops, they speak at length about the movement. There's a lot of criticism. Say that the movement is charismatic. Now it's very positive. But at that time in the Italian church, it was like saying it's Protestant or heretical. The end of all the deliberations at that Episcopal conference, they decided to institute a commission of 5 bishops to decide the fate of the movement. So, yet again, another investigation. The movement goes back to square one. Anticipating the outcome, February 1960, President of the Episcopal Conference, Cardinal Siri, ban on priests and religious from attending the meetings of the movement. also forbids the Mariapolis. After 10 years, now there was no longer going to be a Mariapolis in the Dolomites. The verdict of the commission, the Italian bishops, followed 1960. Devastating was its verdict. This movement of pseudo-mysticism, the danger to the doctrine, rules, and morals of the Church. Focolarinism is a charismatic phenomenon. Movement is polluted with heresy, effective in its root, and disconcerting in its habits. Devastating. But what does the Episcopal Commission decide? November 1960, the conclusions of this commission are discussed. Question was put to the vote. Dissolve the movement or give it a last chance. Montini got up and read to the bishops Gino Giordano. The bishops knew a letter that he'd written a few days before to Montini. The letter finished, "The commission condemns us because we want to be Christians." Silence in the hall. Montini proposes a solution that suit everyone, make criticisms and condemnations public. You're obliged to reform. Also, this proposal is in vain. 15 of the dissolving of the Focolare movement. 19th of November, 1900. 16 years since the beginning of Piazza Cappuccini, enormous, vital community, young, active body of Christ, which is the Church, but it's not accepted by the pre-conciliar Italian Church. How do we go? How does one go ahead? How to go ahead? Before going who are involved should be listened to. The Focolarini, who had never been listened to, and in a particular way that the Archbishop of Trent should be heard. The ill hadn't been able to attend the bishop's meeting. Carlo de Ferrari, as soon as he heard of the bishop's decision, picks up his pen to defend yet again, in a passionate way, the Focolarini. Wrote to the Secretariat of State, to the Holy Office, various cardinals and bishops, and to the Pope, John the 23rd, whom he knew well. They were friends. Since when the Pope had been the Patriarch of Venice. This was the last, who died shortly afterwards, 1962. So the last word was up to the Pope. What would John the 23rd decide? John the 23rd felt nothing regarding the dissolution of the movement. He asked for de Ferrari's opinion. Ground, there was also another factor. In Germany, was the bishops there were used to autonomous actions, initiatives from the laity, and also the Brazilian bishops had allowed the Mariapolis in their countries. Or the negative verdict of the Italian bishops. Hope to save the work of Mary. John the 23rd gave the task of those who are involved with the movement Martigiani to carry ahead to write out a rule for the Focolarini. Finally, in March 1962, the approval ad experimentum came about for the men's branch. However, there was a delay for the approval of the female branch, still some reserves to give juridical responsibilities to Chiara, because there was the fear that when she died, everything would die. Good Friday, 14th of April, in Brussels, Chiara wrote the famous meditation. Tired, Lord, we're tired under the cross. Only a year later, in 1963, the approval of the women's branch came about. It's only from this point onwards that we find Chiara's name as the author of her books, published anonymously until then. Then, perhaps we all know the story of how Chiara hopes for a trade union, a coordinating council between the female and male branches. Chiara wanted such a coordinating council to be chaired by a woman. That epoch, it seemed, a female leadership for a big community, which involved men and women. That seemed out of the question at that time, until in June 1963, a new pope comes, Montini, Paul VI. On the 31st of October 64, Paul VI invited Chiara for a private audience. The Pope urges her to say everything is possible here, assures her. He affirms her role as leader of the movement. Shortly afterwards, Chiara is elected president of the Coordinating Council, and in her diary of the 7th of November 1965, we can read this. I've just sent out the first letter since God has given me this task as president of the movement, but let's hope above all, president of charity. We've come to the end, and I think we can repeat. It's that sentence from Dante. And so we came out again to see the stars shining again. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Michel, for this fantastic talk, really very rich in historical content. We've got a number of questions, and if it's okay for you, we would already start with the first one. So let's ask everyone who's got any other questions if you can just send them to the person called Domanda. So we'll start with the first question. So it's I read in an autobiography that initially Bernardo was too hard on his first companions. Could this be a really common thing in historical movements, that there's an excessive zeal? The question also gives the reply, I think. So effectively, when you're talking about something that's so strong, a charism that enters into history, it's huge, and it breaks all the kind of normal systems. And when you've got a real, true, authentic charism, it involves people, things, all the plans, all the ways of working we've always had, and that can happen. I'm happy to hear that about this St. Bernard. So now There's a second question.
Il modo di fare di
The
Chiara
way that
iniziale,
Chiara did
a
things
cui
at the
hai
beginning
accennato,
that you hinted
forse
at,
eccessivo. Hai
it might
parlato
have been a bit
della sua
excessive.
viscida
You
tirannia.
talked about her
Potrebbe
tyranny, her
essere
soft
antologica di
tyranny. Could
emulazioni che hanno
this
portato negli
be
anni
the
successivi
history
a
that
dei
then
veri e propri
took
abusi di
us
autorità?
towards true, real abuse of authority?
Certamente, qui naturalmente
Certainly here
ci vuole tanta
you need
discernimento
a lot
anche nella
of
seguita
discernment
nelle persone che
in the people
seguono
who follow
il sentiero che Chiara ha iniziato,
the footpath that
tanto
Chiara
discernimento
started.
per
You
capire
need a lot of discernment to
come
understand
agire. E
how
quindi
to act.
certamente
And
credo
certainly,
che
I believe
abbiamo fatto anche
that
bene a riconoscere che
we've
c'è
done
stata
well to
tante
recognize
volte
that there has
un,
often been
appunto, un abuso di potere,
an
di
abuse of
influenza,
power or influence.
magari perché era entrata un
Perhaps
po' nella
because
cultura nostra
this entered into our
un'imitazione troppo
culture, a
facile,
bit of a
un'imitazione
too
anche
easy an
non,
imitation, not
non ben capito,
not
e
well
quindi un
understood,
atteggiamento che
of an
agli
attitude
inizi
that at the
doveva essere
beginning
presente per,
it would have been
far venire fuori questa carisma,
perhaps present in order to help this charism
però
to come about. But
certamente io
certainly,
credo anche il fatto
I
che noi
believe
adesso
also the
parliamo
fact that we now
chiaramente di questo,
speak
che
clearly
riconosciamo anche
of
che
this,
le
that we
accuse di
recognize
allora
that the
erano di questo tipo, di questo
accusations
genere,
of that time were of
è
that
anche
type.
giusto e
I
anche
think that's right.
vuol dire anche che
And you can
sì,
say
che siamo a un punto che
that we are
riconosciamo
at a point where
che
we
lì c'è una
recognize that
fonte
there
di
was
abuso di potere
a
se non
fount of abuse of
seguito
power
con discernimento.
that if it wasn't followed with a great deal of discernment.
C'è una terza domanda.
There's another question. I'll just repeat it. Now we're rediscovering about accompaniment and how we work in the church. Could it be that the criticisms we had about not wanting direction and taking strength away from the institutional church, like Catholic Action, has it got some basis?
Ecco, è un po' qui la stessa cosa, no?
Again, here the
Qui
same
abbiamo
thing
a
is
che
there.
fare
Here
con
we are talking
irrompere di
about
qualcosa di nuovo nella Chiesa.
when
E
something new
quindi
is being born in the
inevitabilmente
church. Inevitably,
le cose vanno a scapita
things
di
get
altre
lost.
istituzioni,
The
si
new
sentono
takes away a
minacciate
bit from
e
the old. Other
cioè
institutions feel threatened.
bisogna riconoscere,
And we need
penso
to
anche adesso
recognize
abbiamo dato il nome di
now.
San Bernardo, ma si
We've
pensa
just
a
talked
un
about
San
St. Bernard,
Francesco e
but the
probabilmente
same would
tanti
have been
altri
true with St.
che hanno
Francis or
iniziato
others who
hanno
started.
dovuto
They had
rompere
to
con delle
break
cose e
with
per quello mi è
things.
piaciuto di leggere
And
quello
that's
che Chiara
why
ha
I
scritto
liked what
riguardo
Chiara
all'azione
wrote
cattolica, che
about
non
Catholic
è giusto
Action,
di
that it's not
criticarli,
right to
è meglio
criticize
subire
them.
e
It's better to
riconoscere che
suffer and recognize
naturalmente
that
loro si sono sentiti,
they felt,
hanno visto veramente che sono andati via
they
le
saw
forze
that
migliori,
yes, they did
non so,
take the
come
greater
sappiamo
strength away,
in
the best
fede dei
strength
democrati
away,
di Gino
and there
Bonadimani che erano
were
appunto
others,
erano i capi
the
dell'azione cattolica a
leaders
Padova, ma poi
of Catholic
dopo
Action in
poco si sono
Padova.
messi con i
But at a certain
Focolarini e è
point, they
finita
all
tutta
went with
l'azione cattolica.
the Focolare,
Non
and
può
that was the end
non
of Catholic Action
dare
there.
reazioni, eccetera.
And there are
D'altra
reactions.
parte, così nascono
But
le cose nuove
that's
nella
how new
Chiesa.
things are born in the
Il punto
church.
della guida
And
spirituale, questo è anche molto
the thing
interessante,
about
che si
spiritual
vede
guidance,
che
that's interesting
naturalmente erano
because you
non
see that
esperti, le
they
prime
weren't
focolarine
experts.
erano
The first Focolare
tutti in seguito anche i primi
they
focolaroni
all
andavano indietro a Chiara,
they all
non
followed
avevano
Chiara,
questa
but they didn't
coscienza,
have an
anche se
awareness,
i sacerdoti naturalmente dovevano
even
averla,
if
ma
the
erano così
priests among them should
affascinati
have
da
had, but they were
questa
so
nuova luce,
fascinated
di
by
questo
this
Gesù
new
in mezzo,
light and this
sperimentato tante volte così,
experience of Jesus in the midst
molto
that was
fisicamente quasi,
so
molto
almost physically
palpabile.
felt.
E quindi
It was
lì
palpable,
erano in
and
un'euforia, in
it was they were
erano
like a
in
bit
una grazia
euphoric. They were in the
che
middle of a
li ha
grace
portati
that took them
appunto come se
as if
il peccato originale non
as
esistesse
if
più.
original sin didn't
Quindi
exist
bisogna,
anymore.
penso,
So you need to
riconoscere che qui siamo
think
proprio agli
and
inizi
recognize that
di una
here we are
cosa
right
nuova
at the beginning of something
e,
new.
che poi
That then
vuol dire che adesso dobbiamo
that means that
riprendere
now we
questa
need to
responsabilità di,
retake our responsibility
sì, di non
to
cadere nei
not
rischi
fall
che magari
into
prima
the
c'erano, anche se i
places
rischi
that
lì
they
erano
did before.
tante volte sublimato da quel Gesù in mezzo così
You know that
speciale
what went wrong then was
ai
so
primi tempi.
taken by the experience of the first times. We don't need to fall there.
Grazie Michel.
Thank you,
Un'altra
Michelle.
domanda dice
Another
così,
question says,
durante gli anni di studio per
during
il tuo
the years
dottorato,
of study
avrai
for your
sicuramente
doctorate,
fatto tante
maybe
riflessioni
you'd have
sulle
had lots
novità
of reflection
scoprite.
on the novelty
C'è
that you
una di
discovered.
queste riflessioni
Is
che
there
trovi più
any of these
importante da condividere?
reflections that you find that's most important to share with us?
Allora dico due cose. Una piccola
So I'm going to
cosa,
say two things. A
l'atteggiamento
small
di
thing,
Chiara
the
rispetto
attitude
a
of
padre
Chiara
Casimiro e
towards Padre
alla
Casimiro
focolarina, anzi
and
le due o tre focolarine che si
the
sono
2 or 3
distaccate dal movimento.
Focolarini who took
Ho
themselves
visto che
away
Chiara non
from
ha
the
mai voluto
movement.
parlare di questo
Chiara never
e
wanted to
non
talk
tanto
about
per
it,
chiudere gli occhi,
not
anzi per
because she wanted to
rispetto di
close her
queste
eyes, but
persone.
for
E
respect
quindi
for those people, out of
questo
respect for
mi ha
those.
toccato, questa è una
And
piccola
that
cosa,
really
vero?
struck me.
Un'altra cosa più
And
grande
something
è la
else
scoperta
was the
che
discovery that
veramente Chiara
really
dall'inizio ha
Chiara, from the
avuto una
beginning,
visione universale.
had a
Questo
universal
pensiero
vision,
universalistico
this
di Chiara
universal thought that she had.
non si combinava bene di avere una regola, gli
So
statuti.
it didn't
Lei
really
era
work well
al
with
di là
having
di
a
questo,
rule or a
non
statute. She
voleva neanche
thought bigger
avere un
than that.
movimento,
She didn't want to have
chiaramente,
a
voleva
movement.
semplicemente
She
vivere
just
il Vangelo,
wanted to
solo il
live the
Vangelo.
gospel. That's all she
E
wanted, just the gospel.
allora, infatti, una delle mie
So
conclusioni
one of my
nella
conclusions
dissertazione era
in my
che
dissertation
quasi più che una
was that
spiritualità,
more
quella
than
che
a
Chiara ha fondato
spirituality, what
è
Chiara founded
un'ermeneutica del Vangelo, una
was
visione sul
a
Vangelo.
vision
Gesù
of the
abbandonato
gospel.
all'unità
Jesus
come
forsaken unity
punti
as
di lettura,
points,
chiave di
as
lettura
ways
per
of
capire
reading,
tutto il
keys
Vangelo.
of how to read
E
the
questo si
whole
vede
gospel.
praticamente in
And
tutta
you
la
see
vita di
that
Chiara, anche
in the
se
whole life of
naturalmente
Chiara,
un certo
even
momento ci
if,
voleva il
yes,
movimento,
at a
ci
certain
voleva
point you
una
needed a
legge,
movement, at
gli
a certain point you
statuti,
needed a
eccetera,
statute,
e Chiara ha
and
difesa
Chiara
questa cosa
defended
naturalmente
that,
perché
that
siamo
naturally,
nell'umano, quindi ci
because
vuole.
we are human,
Però
you
in
need
fondo
it.
c'è
But at
più
the
forte ancora questa
base, what is
pensiero
strongest even
universalistico che vale
is
poi
this
per tutti, così come il
universal
Vangelo vale
thought.
per tutti, nessuno è escluso.
So that's
Infatti
valid
la
for
cosa
everyone, like the
che
gospel,
mi
valid for
dà
everyone.
molta
Nobody's
gioia di
excluded from that.
scoprire
And it gave
che
me a
negli
lot of joy
ultimi
to
statuti
discover
del
that in the last
2007, quindi
statute
proprio
from
la revisione, no?
2007,
La
the
revisione
revision,
ultima che Chiara
the
ha potuto
latest
fare
revision that
degli
Chiara
statuti
did of the
riconosciuti nel
statutes,
90, ma
and
in 2007 è
in
riuscita a
2007,
riconoscere dalla Chiesa che il
she had it
movimento è
recognized
aperto
from the
a
church that the
tutti,
movement is open to everyone.
che praticamente lo
That
scopo del
practically
movimento
the
è
aim of the
la
movement
fratellanza
was
universale, i
universal brotherhood,
dialoghi con tutti, i
dialogue
cinque
with
dialoghi,
everyone, the
l'inondazione,
5 dialogues, the
tutto dentro in
inundations.
quella regola
It's
che
all
dice
there in that
la visione
statute
universalistica
that
di
gives
Chiara,
us this
universale
universal
come il
vision of
Vangelo.
Chiara,
Questo è molto
as
tanto.
universal as the gospel is.
Grazie, molto interessante. Allora passiamo alle
That's
domande.
really interesting. So
Cominciano
let's
a essere
go.
tante, ma
There's lots of questions now, but
andiamo per ordine, come
let's
abbiamo
go
detto
in
finora.
order. In the period in which Chiara wasn't president, who did her job? How did the people in the movement react when that Chiara didn't really guide the movement, at least not by name? We don't know a lot about that period of how they managed, because Chiara, when she had to leave aside the leading of the movement, she proposed Natalia, who would take her place. But then that wasn't accepted at the end. It was Josie. So Josie took the formal place of Chiara. She never put herself forward, but when you needed to write a letter to the Pope or to somebody important, official letter, Josie signed it. And this also was not the leadership, because at the end we know the hidden fountain, the fountain, the inspiration always came from her. So even if the bishop said at the beginning, nobody will notice, so the bishop said nobody will really notice because there's Chiara, and that's where the life is, that's where the life is flooding from. But certainly Chiara had to be very careful, but certainly in public, in Maria Places, she never spoke, maybe to a small group, but all her writings. And in the 50s, there's very few writings. Maybe a bit later, some Meditations was published in 59, and it was anonymous, and they were writings from Paradise. So Chiara, she continued to be the person that everybody referred to in the internal part of the movement, but outside there was Don Foresi, who took on a role of spokesman, above all with the Vatican bishops, and juridically there was a visitor, the person who who watched over the movement, and they needed to be informed of everything. There had to be an agreement with everything. That doesn't take anything away from the fact there was still the three, Igino Giordani, Don Foresi, and Chiara at the center of the direction of the movement, really. Triumvirate was the word he was looking for. We've got a lovely comment that's just arrived. I'll read it as it's written. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'd like to say publicly that now I've understood this rigidity in dividing the female from the male part of the opera, and this is all fruit of this being put under the study of the church. And I moved away from the opera for a while, and I'm trying to come back. Your meeting has really clarified a lot for me, and for the first time I've really understood the Night of Chiara. Do you want to comment on this at all? No, I'm really in agreement that so much, for me also, this has been a great light to understand this division that was it's been so rigid between the male and the female part of the movement, that has this root. That's where it's come from. At a certain point I realized that the reason that the Mariapolis of Fiera di Primiera. At a certain point, it had to go to Vigo di Fassa. For 2 years, it was in Vigo di Fassa. Because, why? So that there, the hotels and where people stayed was very, very separate from one another. So we could split men and women much better. So that's one of the many examples. So let's continue. Another question. So, do you think you're going to continue your research on the next years? And are there any historical elements or facts that you didn't expect to find and that really surprised you? Can you give us some examples like that? Like that about the weather on the 7th of December.
Sì, ecco, la prima parte della domanda è
The first part of the question is, will I go ahead in my studies? I've done the same research for the whole of Chiara's life. Today we just looked at the 50s, but I have done the research for the whole of the life of Chiara, right to the end of her life.
Quindi sì, sì, c'erano tanti esempi.
There's lots of examples.
Sì, adesso sono un po' tentato di dire.
Now I'm a bit tempted to say something that might be a bit surprising.
Comunque è una mia personale
But it's my
opinione, no?
personal opinion.
Visto che
I've seen that
studiando bene le letterine
studying
dei
the
primi
letters of
anni,
the early years,
che ho avuto proprio la
I had
grazia anche di poter
I had the
entrare
grace also to go there
come si dice, nell'archivio
into the archive
a Roma, a Rocca di
in
Papa.
Rome at Rocca di
E quindi
Papa,
studiando tutte queste
and studying these letters
facendo il confronto, eccetera,
and comparing
a me mi è
them,
parso molto chiara a un certo
it
momento
really seemed very clear to me at a
come
certain
la
point
sequenza delle
that
scoperte
the sequence of the discoveries of the spirituality, because Chiara, at a certain point, I remember I read a passage of a conversation with Chiara with Gino Giordani, who asked, well, what came about first, Jesus forsaken or unity? The discoveries of the first years were so intense and overwhelming that she couldn't remember either what came first or after. But reading the first letters really carefully and trying to date the letters, because many haven't got dates, they're just written, so they're written without a date. Once you clearly, or try to at least understand what month they were written in, you begin to understand the line of the order of the discoveries of Chiara. I'm pretty convinced that the discovery, we start with God is love. That is the first. We don't really know when that came about or which year that came about, really. Yeah. God love, that was the first of everything. But then, towards the end of that year, 44 maybe, we come up with Jesus Forsaken. Before then, she's not talked about it. We always say the 24th of January, 44, but there's no evidence in the letters of that. It's much more probable that that was much further on in the year, at the end of that year, 44, before the discovery of unity, which comes about more or less in the last weeks of the war. When Chiara in the writing starts to talk about fullness of joy, the fullness of joy, which are the exact words of that passage of John,
preghiera per l'unità.
This,
Quindi
and John 17, the prayer of unity. So could be April or May 45. She starts to be aware of unity, that she begins to talk about unity. Then certainly they live. And then you see at a certain point, at a certain point, the letters become much fewer. And it could be that they've been lost. It's more probable that at a certain point, Chiara couldn't write. Because perhaps, I don't know, maybe because of this criticism, she'd already started to be a bit more careful. So Padre Casimiro writes to the Catholic Action of the Third Order, and there Padre Casimiro comes out and he talks about unity, and that comes from Chiara. But little by little you understand how they live, little by little. And then in May 47, so we're a bit later, Chiara, according to me, at a certain point, she reads, I don't know where, but somewhere, these words, where two or more are united in my name, there will I be amongst them. And there's a real check, and she starts to understand, so it's that's our reality, that's what we live. And she begins to talk about Jesus in the midst. And there she really begins to talk, maybe May 47, of the Word of Life. And then again, yes, they keep living. Yeah. I'm going on to a whole new theme. We have to do this another time. I don't know if I lost. Did I manage to answer the question? I'm not sure.
Okay. Ma ne abbiamo ancora, quindi noi finché abbiamo tempo.
But we have more questions. So while we've got a bit of time, we'll continue. So this is a bit of historical interest. So one question is, by chance, do you know what happened to Padre Lombardi? Another is, how did Cardinal Ottaviani react to the approval of the movement? It's just a bit of historical interest. Our listeners are interested. So they've got these interesting questions.
Sì, qui infatti non posso rispondere con
esattezza. So some I can't reply exactly. Padre Lombardi,
in una grande notte scura anche lui.
He had a big dark night.
Perché poi
because then not only did he lose
questo sogno di
this dream of being able to unite the two movements, but also he had some not easy relationships with John the 23rd, so he didn't feel considered maybe, and he had a bit of a crisis. And also his collaborators, in 58, some of them went away. They left his work as well. So Mondo Migliore became quite reduced. But you would need to ask a different historian, really. About the others, who was it? Ottaviani, you were asking? There, I don't really know how to answer either. I know he was a very holy man because he's very famous for his pastoral care, the care he had for youth in Trastevere. So he gave of himself.
una persona di
But
coscienza
he's
che aveva
person
questa idea di
conscience.
dover
He had
difendere
this
tutta
idea that
la
he had to
tradizione,
defend
quindi l'ha
the
fatto
tradition.
con tutto il se stesso.
He did that for with all of
Non lo
himself.
so, non
I
so
don't know.
proprio come è stata la sua reazione.
I don't know
Certo,
how
mi
his
sa che
reaction
lui
was. I
il
know
Vaticano II non ha avuto facile,
that
perché certamente all'inizio
he didn't
pensava
find
lui
Vatican II easy
di proporre
because at the beginning
delle cose che
he was trying to propose things
della tradizione che poi non sono
about
state
tradition that
accettate.
weren't accepted.
So che c'è stato un
So I know
cardinale
that there was a
olandese,
cardinal, a
Alfink,
Dutch
che a un certo
cardinal,
momento
Alfink,
nel
who at a
concilio,
certain
durante una
point
delle
in the
sessioni, quando
council,
Ottaviani stava
when
parlando,
Ottaviano was
ha
speaking,
tolto il microfono
he took the
con
microphone
un
away
grande
from him
applauso
with a
in
great
tutta la
applause
sala, per
from
cui
the whole
Ottaviani
hall. So Ottaviani,
credo 2 settimane non si è
I
più
think
fatto
for
vedere
2
nell'aula
weeks he didn't go back to the
cioè
council,
nelle chiese,
wasn't seen.
nella chiesa di San Pietro, dove c'era il concilio. Però credo che
But I
dopo lui
believe that
sarà stato
afterwards he would have been
pienamente si
also,
è accordato con le decisioni del
he would
Vaticano,
have agreed with the
del
decisions
concilio.
of the Vatican and the council.
Bisognerebbe però chiedere proprio agli
But
storici.
you would need to ask somebody else.
Sì, grazie Michele già per tutti
Thank
questi
you.
dettagli
Thank you
molto
for all of these details.
Ancora un'altra? La
So
facciamo?
one more, can we manage
Allora,
still? So officially,
ufficialmente sono stati tolti
there
i divieti sia di partecipare al movimento
had
per i
the
sacerdoti sia per i matrimoni.
prohibition to participate in the life of the movement by the priests, was it actually taken away officially?
È strano il
That
fatto che
that forbidding
dopo
a
che
certain
era già accordato lo statuto per
once
la
the
parte
statute
maschile
was
in Paradiso
agreed for the male part in
ehm,
62,
solo c'era ancora questo divieto,
there
quindi la
was
Chiesa è stata un
still
po'
this
tardiva
forbidding.
a togliere
So the
questo
church was a
divieto,
little
però
bit late in taking away that
evidentemente quindi anche
prohibition,
per
but it was
Mariapoli
taken away. And also
sì.
to have Mariapolis, that was also taken away.
Ancora un paio di domande
And then a
storiche,
couple of
forse
questions about historical
vediamo
ones.
queste, perché dobbiamo dire che tu sei stato molto
And we need to
paziente, i
say that
nostri
you've been
spettatori
so patient
altrettanto, e
with
quindi concludiamo con
everyone.
queste
So we'll
due
conclude with these
storiche.
2 questions.
Come spieghi che
How do you
Montini abbia
explain
capito
that
così profondamente il nascente
Montini
movimento? Questa è una domanda. E l'altra
understood
che in fondo è legata,
about the
perché
movement?
pensi che il parere dei
And
vescovi
what
di
do you
Brasile e
think
Germania sia stato così
the
diverso
bishops,
da
why
quello
did the
che
bishops in
sembra
Brazil and Germany and
nel
other
passato?
places have such a different reaction to the movement?
Sì, lì ci sono i vari studi di
There's
Riccardi, Andrea
different
Riccardi per esempio, che sono
studies. Andrea Riccardi's
molto di luce su questo periodo.
done some
Lui ha
things that
studiato proprio
are
questo
of
periodo.
great light on this period.
Per quello che so io,
So
Montini
from what I know, Montini
aveva questa
had
apertura,
an openness,
soprattutto
above all,
perché lui aveva
because
molto chiara la
he was very
la
clear
priorità della coscienza
about the
personale delle persone.
priority of
Quindi
personal
se c'era
conscience.
qualcosa di
So
autentica
if
in
it was
una
something
persona, lui
authentic
lo
in somebody,
prendeva sul serio e
he took
quindi
that very
quando è
seriously.
stato Papa ha
So when
subito
he
anche
was
messa
post, he straight away
la pluriformità
he started talking about
della Chiesa
pluriformity of the church. So
come sì, l'ha messa in chiave, l'ha messa chiara. E poi anche
and he
la
was very
parola
clear about that.
dialogo,
And also
proprio
he
è
talked about
suo,
dialogue.
no? Che da quando
That's
Paolo VI ha
his.
preso il posto
When
del cattedra di San Pietro,
so
lui
when Paul VI
ha lanciato questa
became
idea di
Pope, he
dialogo.
launched this idea about dialogue.
Allo stesso momento lui era anche
At the
una
same
persona
moment, he was also somebody,
molto cauta, molto prudente.
he was
E
very
quindi
careful.
ci sono anche lettere
So there are
sue,
also letters
per esempio
from
al
him
Papa di uno dei primi focolarini,
to one of the fathers of one of the first Focolarini.
Non so se Antonio,
I don't know.
qui non,
I don't know which one. I can't remember.
non ho sbagliato, ma che il papà di questo focolarino aveva scritto a Montini
The father of this Focolarino wrote to Montini that he was very worried because this child wanted to enter the Focolare, and he said, "What do you suggest?" And Montini said, apart from freedom of conscience, he said, personally, I would advise you, I would advise that they go into a structure that's recognized by the church. So you see, also he was quite careful, but he wanted to follow conscience. But he was also somebody who had an eye for novelty.
Poi mi deve aiutare Luca.
And then you need to help me with what was the other question.
Molto semplice, vescovi tedeschi e
The German bishops.
Sì, per i vescovi tedeschi la cosa era
the German bishops, there's a bit different. In Germany, Catholic Action never had great success. And so there, also because they'd also already been involved with the Lutheran Church, other churches, it was already a church that was a bit more open. And the contribution of the German cardinals at the Second Vatican Council was very important. They had this experience, this trust in the laity that was a bit more developed. And I think also in the same in Brazil.
È un fatto che
la Chiesa italiana preconciliare, the pre-conciliar Italian Church wasn't prepared for this big event. It wasn't really prepared for the Second Vatican Council. And I think this is one of the conclusions that Riccardi had in his book, but you'd need to go and read it to be exact.
Benissimo, grazie infinite Michel. Sono le 21.
Thank you, Michel. It's 9:30 and we need to conclude. All our listeners. So one of our listeners says that Padre Lombardi died a bit abandoned by everyone. It's a message in the chat from someone. Maybe you could put another of you in touch and you could have a good conversation. Maybe it'd be the second edition of the book.
Sì, c'è un libro anche in italiano.
There is a book. It's in Italian.
Siamo già agli ultimi. Dovrei fare una ristampa, ma
I would need to reprint it. Those of us who've listened on YouTube or here, would all be very interested in the book. Maybe we can do it in Dutch. Whoever wants to see the original,
sì, io spero di poter fare anche
I hope that I can do it. That I would like to soon do an English version because I can see there is a need for it, perhaps.
Grazie.
Thank you. We'd like to say maybe it'd be nice to continue these exchanges. And remember that the UPM lessons are there once a month. It's the first Saturday of the month. And everyone can link in. There's all the translations. And we think that in this link that you have with everyone in this hour and a half, it would be great to continue to deepen the knowledge of our history, and so that we can live as best as we can this charism.
E allora adesso sono le 21:30,
So
concludiamo.
let's
Ringraziamo ancora
conclude with
Michel.
thank
Abbiamo visto sullo
Michel.
sfondo un sole che sorge, questa aurora.
We've put behind us the sunrise.
E naturalmente abbiamo preso una frase di
And
Dante, abbiamo
maybe
fatto
we
un pezzo
took
di vita di
a
Chiara.
sentence
Io ricordo
of
le frasi di
Dante
Dante sulle
on
stelle, ce ne sono altre
about the
due che abbiamo
stars.
usato
And
nel
there's another couple,
dell'inferno, poi c'è
one that
stato
we
il
use,
paradiso
one that he
e
used
la
in
fine del
hell, and
purgatorio.
then
Quindi
purgatory
magari
and
faremo altre due
heaven.
puntate, così
So maybe we'll have another
per
couple of
poterla ricapitolare.
sessions
Chissà se i
so that we can
nostri
complete
ascoltatori ci
all
sostengono.
of them.
E come vedete sulla chat
So as you can see on the
ci si
chat,
ricorda l'indirizzo
we're being
WhatsApp
reminded
per seguirci, per avere gli avvisi
to follow
delle
us,
prossime
follow everybody on
puntate.
the
Detto
YouTube chat,
questo,
on
Marie e
the
io vi
WhatsApp channel.
ringraziamo
Grazie a
e
tutti,
vi diamo
Thank
appuntamento
you,
alla prossima.
everyone,
Grazie
grazie per
infinite.
l'ascolto, la partecipazione e a presto.
Grazie,
and see you
ciao.
soon. Bye.
Ciao.